Hello everybody and welcome to this next lesson in the IELTS Academic Writing Task 1 series. So in this lesson we're going to take a look at three different actual questions or sample questions from the IELTS exam. First of all, we're going to take a look at this line graph that you can see on the screen. Then we'll take a look at a bar chart and finally a flow chart or flow diagram. And we're going to use these to identify key points of information that we can try and talk about within our essay. Okay, so let's make a start. First of all, let me just zoom in a little bit. Now, one thing it is really important for you guys to do is to read and understand. Okay, so here, writing task 1, you should spend about 20 minutes on this task. So that's roughly how long it should take you to analyze this chart, this graph, and all the information and create your essay. Now, your essay has to be a minimum of 150 words, but I'm going to recommend that you want to aim for somewhere between 170 to 190 words. Okay, let's start by reading the information that we have. The graph below shows radio and television audiences throughout the day in 1992. Summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. Okay, so the information we're given in the writing, there are always this is always split into two. So I'm going to split this here just to show you. Okay, so this section here, okay, is always the same. This is always the instruction. Summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. This is the same for every question. Up here above, this is the information that's specific to the chart or graph that you're reviewing. The line graph below shows radio and television audiences throughout the day in 1992. Now it's important for you guys, okay, to note that in this section here below, summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features. The main features, this means that you don't have to select or report everything, it just means the main features. Make comparisons where relevant. Yeah, so again, you're not comparing everything, you're just making comparisons where that is relevant to the main features. Okay, so you won't compare everything, only the features that you choose to talk about. Write at least 150 words, but as I mentioned, your target is 170 to 190. Right, so let's start by identifying some of the key data. Now, let's take a look at the axes. So we have two axes. We have the vertical and the horizontal. So at the bottom, we can see time. 6 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 12 o'clock, all the way through to 6 o'clock. So this is 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. So because this is describing time, we know the time of day or night. So we know this is what is known as a change over time chart. A change over time chart is a chart that describes the change or how things change over time. In this case, we have hours. Now this axis, the vertical axis here, okay, is in percentages, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, the percentage of the UK population, so that is describing people, over 4 years of age. So young children are obviously excluded from this data. And the other information, the other extra information we have is television and radio. So one line, this line here represents television viewers. The second line represents radio viewers. So let's start by identifying key data points. Now, the start and finish of any line on a line chart can be considered key data points. So we have two lines, so each line has a start and an end point. Highs and lows. So here is a high point. Here might be considered a low point. Here is a high point, and again, here is another low point. Now, other interesting aspects might be where lines cross, where one line or where the number of viewers of television passes the number of viewers or the number of listeners on radio. So where this data crosses can be considered to be interesting. Yep. Okay, so the main features remember we're trying to identify main features. Are there any other main features within this chart? Well, yes, there certainly are. And the one thing you always want to try and find in any kind of chart is the overall trend in viewing figures in this instance. So we're starting at 6 a.m. and we're finishing at 6 p.m. And if we take a look, I think we could probably hazard a guess that the number of viewers at 6 a.m. and the number of viewers at 6 p.m. they are probably roughly the same. So our trend from the beginning to the end is going to be quite flat. So that's our overall trend in the diagram. But there are two other trends which are interesting. So we have a trend in the radio listeners which peaks early in the morning and then descends or drops throughout the rest of the day. Whereas our trend with television viewers, let me try and change the color for this one just to make it a little bit easier for you to see. The trend in television viewers climbs much steeper throughout the day before it drops suddenly after midnight. So we have an overall trend, but then we have two trends from each of the different scenarios we're given, television and radio. Now, the final thing that we want to do with this particular chart is try and think about how we can split the data, how we can split the information that we have. Now, let me try and show you how this might be possible. Let me just clear up a little bit. So here we are given a clear way to split our data. So we could just draw a line between television and radio. And in paragraph 1 up here, we can talk about television. In paragraph 2, we can talk about radio. So that's one easy way for us to split the information. Another way might be to choose, let's say, a point in time. So the halfway point on this chart would be 6 o'clock here. So anything on this side, you might talk about in your first paragraph, and anything over here, you may talk about in your second paragraph. So there are two ways that we can split this chart logically to give us two different pieces of data to describe. Okay, so television and radio, or before 6 p.m. or after 6 p.m. Right, so now let's take a look at a bar chart. And again, remember, what we're trying to do here is identify the key data points. The highs, the lows, the starts, the finishes, any points of interest, and the overall trend that we might want to describe as well. Before we get started though, let's just remind ourselves of what our task is. Our task here is to summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and comparing where relevant. So remember that it's actually impossible to report everything that you can see. You're given too much data to allow you to actually write about everything. So you have to decide on the main features. And if you remember from previous videos, for your main features, you need more than one, 5 or less than 5. So you want definitely more than one, probably less than 5. Start by reading what our chart is about. The chart below shows the number of men and women in further education in Britain in 3 periods and whether they were studying full-time or part-time. Now this bar chart, as you can see, is ideal for splitting the data. You can see the data is already split for you in 2 different ways. We have male and female, and then we have full-time and part-time. So the data is already split for you. So I would suggest in this case, choose one of these very logical ways to split your data. Yeah, either split it straight down this line here, male and female, or use full-time and part-time as your 2 key points or 2 key paragraphs. Yeah, so if you split this data based on male and female, this information would constitute paragraph 1. This information here would constitute paragraph 2. Whereas if you split your data based on full-time versus part-time, then full-time would be paragraph 1 and part-time would be paragraph 2. Okay, but that's splitting the data. Let's actually spend a little bit of time trying to identify our key data points first before we split. So where were we? Here we go. So key data points. If you remember from a previous video, a bar chart, on a bar chart, it might be harder for some people to actually see the data or to visualize the data. So what you can do very easily is turn a bar chart into a line chart. Let's do that. And I'll choose a different color up here. Okay, so we now have a line chart, which some people find easier to visualize. And once you have a line chart, it's easier to select start points and end points. It's perhaps easier for you to see the high points on a line and the low points on a line. So a high point, I think, is here and the low point is here. It's easier for us to identify the overall trend. So let's look at the trends here. So for part-time education started at 10,000 and has definitely increased. Okay, full-time education started around about here and is now here. So that is definitely showing an overall increase. So our overall trend would definitely be that more people are going into education. But there is another overall trend here, which I think is more interesting and definitely relevant and something that you have to notice and mention. And that is the number of people who are in part-time education far exceeds the number of people in full-time education. Yes, so the black boxes here demonstrate full-time education. The grey boxes here demonstrate part-time education. So although the overall trend of people in education is increasing, what we can also identify is the number of people who are entering into part-time education is definitely doing this. It is definitely increasing on a dramatic scale. Okay. Those are, in my view, the key points of data that you need to identify in this case. We also need to understand that we're talking about thousands. This is men and women, so we're describing people in their thousands, and here we're describing time. So we have change over time again. So let's now move on to looking at a completely different type of chart, and that is a flow chart or a flow diagram. Welcome back, and here you can see on the screen a completely different type of chart, and a lot of people get confused about this kind of chart. It is simply a diagram showing a process or a flow of actions or data, and you should not be too frightened or worried if you get this kind of chart. They are just as easy to write about. So let's take a look at the instructions again. Summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. Okay, so our instructions are exactly the same. So we're going to go through exactly the same process of trying to highlight key data points, key information, and then we're going to select more than one, hopefully no more than 5, and we will look at not necessarily highs and lows or start and finish points, but we will look at different kinds of data that you find in these kinds of charts. Let's always start by reading what we have. The diagram below shows the process by which bricks are manufactured for the building industry. Very, very simple description. Let me zoom in just a little bit more. Okay, so one of the things that we can definitely do with this kind of flowchart, okay, is identify the start. Let's type S for start, and let's type F for finish. So we have a starting point, and we have an end point, a finish. And here we're not given data in the form of numbers, we're given data in the form of pictures. So we have a digger, which is digging clay. So here we have, let's call it a raw material. Our raw material is processed in figure 2. And here in figure 3, we have something interesting. Okay, we have sand and water, which the arrow is looking like it's indicating extra materials are added to a process. And here we have 2 arrows which show 2 options in our process. So 2 options is definitely a key data point. Here you will see we have what looks like an automated system versus a manual system. Okay. Followed by a drying process, a drying oven, which is then followed by our kilns. Our kilns are where the bricks are properly dried out so that they're ready to use. Then we have packaging and then delivery. So what are our other key data points here? Well, you're actually given quite a lot of information. Okay, metal grid. So the metal grid is obviously used in a process to process the raw material of clay before extra materials are added to it. This section here, okay, stands on its own, the drying oven. And we're given time 24 to 48 hours. This time is relevant. This is important information. We are then given more information, okay, 48 to 72 hours. So we have a drying oven which is probably very, very hot and very quick. Then we have another drying process which takes a longer period. So we have a quick drying period followed by a longer drying period. So we can contrast and compare this data? Yep. Okay, packaging and delivery. I don't know. I'm not sure whether this is key data, but obviously our bricks have to be packaged and delivered. So it is something that we can perhaps talk about. Yeah. Now here, because of the type of data we have, we don't have an overall trend. There is no overall trend here to actually describe and talk about. But what we can talk about as an alternative, perhaps, is these two processes. There is a automated process and a manual process. We may speculate that the automated process is more common than the manual process. Or we might speculate that the manual process is more common in third world or less developed countries. Whereas in more modern countries, where you may live, say in Europe, in China, or in other countries where there is lots of automation, the automated process may be more natural or relevant. Okay, so again, this is not an overall trend, but this is something interesting that you can discuss instead of your overall trend. Discuss automation versus manual labor. Okay. We all need bricks for building, no matter where you are in the world. So there's always going to be a need for bricks. That's why this process might be described as being important and relevant for everybody. So that is potentially another overall trend that you can describe. The need for building bricks wherever you are in the world. There will always apparently be a need for bricks. Okay, so we have looked at line charts, we have looked at bar charts, and now we have looked at a flow chart. The flow chart gives you pictures rather than data. But the important thing for you guys to remember is that no matter what you're looking at, your task is the same. Summarize the information by selecting and reporting main features and make comparisons where relevant. So you cannot compare everything. You're just going to compare the main features that you choose to write about. Remember, there needs to be more than one, probably no more than 5. Yeah? Let me ask you one last question. Obviously, we want to split the data that we can see to give us a better chance of writing 2 paragraphs. So is there a natural way for you to split this data? I would say yes. It's not just natural, it's also very, very logical. And in my opinion, it's here. Okay, because we have, let's call it the manufacturing process, then we have the drying and delivery process. Okay, so here, paragraph 1, here, paragraph 2. Okay, I hope that helps for you. Like I said, to summarize, we've looked at line charts, bar charts, and now a flow chart or a flow diagram. Don't be scared or frightened by flow charts. They are not difficult. They are just as easy for you to analyze and find key data as with any other type of chart.